4:47 a.m. Dubuque County, Iowa. April 21st, 2026. A federal entry team breached the east wall of an outbuilding on a 340-acre compound and found a locked interior room. Inside, 3 young women, ages 23, 25, and 26. All reported missing from separate cities across the previous winter. All held for 89 days. One of them asked, before anything else, whether her mother had been told. The operation started with a night shift cook at a truck stop diner off Highway 20, 11 days earlier, who noticed that nobody orders 3 chicken dinners and 3 teas, no sugar, at 3 in the morning. Her name was Marlys Vandenberg. She had worked the 10 to 6 shift at the Blackhawk Junction Diner in Dubuque County for 11 years. She knew every regular, every order, the rhythms that repeated night after night. On April 3, 2026, something broke the pattern. That break, and the single receipt she wrote a license plate number on, unraveled everything. The Blackhawk Junction Diner sat at the intersection of 2 county roads, 3/4 of a mile off the Highway 20 interchange. Vinyl booths. A chalkboard pie list unchanged since 2019. A coffee machine that ran continuously from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. The kind of place that existed because long-haul truckers needed hot food at 2 in the morning, and there was nowhere else within 12 miles to get it. Marlys had worked the overnight shift long enough to see everything. Truckers. Insomniacs. Teenagers who drove 40 minutes from Dubuque for pie because downtown closed at midnight. Occasional state troopers on long stretches. She was not someone prone to speculation. She was, by her own description to investigators, someone who noticed things. Cedar Ridge Fellowship had been her 6 a.m. regulars since spring 2023. The fellowship had purchased the former scout camp, 340 acres of timber and field on a county road south of Highway 20, in autumn 2022. The purchase price in Dubuque County deed records was $1.1 million, paid through a land trust registered in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Within 6 weeks, the fellowship posted private worship signs at every gate and no trespass notices. A chain locked the main access road. The fellowship's founding documents, filed with Iowa as a nonprofit religious organization, described it as a community of men pursuing withdrawal from contemporary society. No female residents. No children. Communal living, communal labor, shared belief, the specifics left unwritten. To Marlys, they were the 6 a.m. regulars. 3 men. Always the same 3. Same order, 6 days a week. Biscuits and gravy, 2 plates. Black coffee, 2 large cups. Sausage links. Cash payment. $4 tip every time. Back on the county road before 6:15. They spoke little. They were polite. Consistent. Marlys had served them close to 300 times across 3 years. She knew their order before they opened their mouths. She knew which one wanted extra gravy. She knew which one checked the weather radar while waiting. She knew the tallest, broad-shouldered, someone she thought of as in charge, never removed his jacket, not even in July when the diner's window unit struggled to keep the room below 80 degrees. 3 years of service creates a kind of closeness, even between strangers. She had their morning rhythm down to the quarter hour. What she did not know until April 3rd was that the rhythm was not what it appeared to be. At 3:14 a.m., a man she had never seen came through the door. Mid-20s, she would tell investigators later. Nervous in a way that suggested unfamiliarity with the errand, not with the world. Not one of the 6 a.m. regulars. Work boots wet with mud up to the ankle. He had come from the compound, not the county road. He did not sit. He approached the counter. 3 chicken dinners. 3 teas. No sugar. Marlys wrote it down, 11 years at the counter means you write down every to-go order. But something caught her attention she could not immediately name and would spend the next 3 days thinking about. 3 chicken dinners. 3 teas. The fellowship publicly claimed no female residents. The 6 a.m. regulars always ordered for men, heavy food, black coffee, never tea. 3 teas with no sugar was not a man's order in 11 years of reading the overnight road. It was particular. Small portions. No sweetener. Food ordered because you had to eat, not because you wanted to. She said nothing to the man. She filled the order. She bagged it. While the bags were assembled, she looked out at the county road and read the license plate on the truck idling outside. Dark-colored late-model pickup. Engine running. No lights visible inside. Iowa registration. She walked back, found a blank receipt, and wrote the number down. She did not know why. She folded it twice and put it in her apron pocket. The man paid in cash and left by 3:22. She watched the truck's taillights disappear toward the compound's access gate. Marlys finished her shift at 6. She drove home. She slept. She returned the next night. The 6 a.m. regulars came in at their usual time with their usual order. She served them. She said nothing. 3 nights after April 3rd, on April 6th, the man came back. 3:19 a.m. Same truck. Same order. 3 chicken dinners. 3 teas. No sugar. This time she also noted that he paid with loose bills pulled from his front pocket, not a wallet. The bills were loose, as if handed to him specifically for this errand, and he had not thought to organize them. He counted out exact change, struggling slightly. That detail meant something to her, though she could not say exactly what. A man running an errand assigned to him, not one he had chosen. Someone had handed him money, told him the amount, and sent him into the dark before 3 in the morning to collect food for people who were not supposed to be there. She went home at 6. She thought about it through the morning. By early afternoon on April 7th, she had picked up the phone and called the Dubuque County Sheriff's non-emergency line. She said she'd seen something that was probably nothing. But there were women at Cedar Ridge, she thought. Women who, based on everything she knew about the fellowship and its routine, were not supposed to be there. And they were getting chicken dinners at 3 in the morning from a man who did not seem assigned to the task. The deputy who took the call flagged it for a supervisor. The supervisor ran Cedar Ridge through the state and county databases. What came back was limited, but not empty. A 2-year-old civil rights inquiry, opened by the FBI's Omaha field office in spring 2024, and dormant since November that year, had flagged 2 of the fellowship's senior leaders. The inquiry came from a custody dispute in which a former member alleged that her adult sister, 24 years old at the time, had been prevented from leaving the compound. The sister eventually left. The inquiry had produced no charges and been set aside when the complaining party declined to pursue it further. The Dubuque County Sheriff's Office forwarded Marlys Vandenberg's tip to the FBI Omaha field office on April 8th, 48 hours after the call. Omaha pulled the dormant file and looked at it again. One detail now read differently against the new tip. The 2 flagged leaders had, during the 2024 inquiry, each declined interviews on Fifth Amendment grounds. At the time, agents had treated that as standard for a group with legal counsel and had not pressed further. Combined with a tip about women in an outbuilding receiving food at 3 in the morning from a nervous junior member, the refusal to interview now read as worth examining more carefully. A supervisory special agent in the Omaha field office opened a new inquiry on April 9th, 2026. Before surveillance could be assembled and positioned, investigators spent April 9th and 10th working through every accessible record connected to the Cedar Ridge property and its occupants. Property tax filings. Power company billing. A septic permit application from 2023 that listed expected occupancy at between 8 and 12 persons, higher than the fellowship's public membership count of 7. Vehicle registrations. The fellowship's nonprofit filings with the Iowa Secretary of State, reviewed in detail by federal investigators for the first time, rather than a county clerk checking boxes. The septic permit stood out. An application for a system-sized, to handle 12 people, filed by a fellowship that publicly had 7 members, required explanation. The county environmental office had approved it without question. Septic systems were routinely oversized. But the filing date mattered. Submitted in August 2023, 14 months after the fellowship moved in, and 6 months before the first woman went missing. Whoever planned the interior use of the outbuilding had anticipated, at least a year in advance, that the compound's waste handling capacity would need to accommodate more than the disclosed population. That single permit, identified on Tuesday morning in a county records database, elevated the inquiry from preliminary to full investigation before surveillance had taken its first position. The court transcripts from the proceeding run over 400 pages. But one line in the surveillance log, entered at 11:42 p.m. on April 11th, tells the story: thermal imagery, outbuilding west of main lodge, consistent heat signature, 3 discrete sources, ambient sustained. 3 people. In a building the power company understood as unheated storage. The FBI Omaha field office, working with the U.S. Marshals Service, assembled a joint surveillance team and established a pattern-of-life operation beginning April 10th. The team worked from 2 concealed positions outside the property line and from air, using a thermal-capable drone authorized under a warrant signed by a federal magistrate in the Northern District of Iowa on April 9th. The ground positions were established in the tree line along the compound's eastern boundary and in a shallow depression behind a hedgerow on the south side. Both positions required agents to approach on foot across open farmland in darkness. The eastern position was approximately 140 meters from the perimeter fence. The southern position was closer, perhaps 90 meters, but offered a narrower sightline to the outbuilding. Both teams operated with passive night vision equipment and communicated on a scrambled tactical frequency recorded in 30-second intervals throughout each night. What the drone showed over the first 4 nights was a compound operating on 2 distinct rhythms. The main lodge, a large timber frame building that had been the scout camp's assembly hall, ran on a daytime schedule consistent with communal living. Movement between approximately 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. Multiple individuals, male body signatures by size and gait. Communal meals at identifiable times. The outbuilding, 80 meters west-northwest of the main lodge, was different. It was a converted equipment shed, approximately 30 by 50 feet, modified after the fellowship's purchase. County building permit records showed no permitted modifications. The power company's account showed monthly draw consistent with climate-controlled space, heating in winter, cooling as temperatures shifted into spring. The fellowship had described it as unheated storage. That was impossible. The building's power draw was incompatible with unheated storage. The thermal signatures were incompatible with an empty building. And most significantly, the pattern of heat movement was incompatible with machinery. Machinery does not move around a room. The signatures did. The surveillance team ran cell site analysis authorized under a second warrant. 3 burner phones were active inside the outbuilding. The phones had never traveled beyond the compound's perimeter. They had never connected to any known network in a way that allowed identification of the users. But they were there. 3 of them. Stationary. In a building the fellowship said was empty. The surveillance logs from those 9 days showed one detail that kept pulling attention: the food deliveries. 3 times in 9 nights, A single male figure left the main lodge after midnight and walked to the outbuilding. Each time, he carried something. Each time, he returned to the lodge within 30 minutes. The fellowship had a communal kitchen for dinner and breakfast. There was no documented reason for a member to carry anything to an unoccupied shed after midnight 3 times in 9 days, unless the shed was occupied. On the 5th night of surveillance, April 15th, the drone team captured something not in previous logs. At 12:51 a.m., the thermal feed showed 2 figures departing the main lodge instead of 1. The lead figure carried what the drone resolved as a container, consistent with food bags. The second figure walked approximately 3 meters behind and stopped at the edge of the cleared area between lodge and outbuilding. The lead figure continued. The second figure stood in place for the full 22 minutes. Then both returned together. The second figure was consistent in thermal signature and body dimensions with one of the 2 senior leaders named in the dormant inquiry. He had not walked to the building. He had stood in the dark between lodge and building, watching. Personal oversight of a routine the fellowship apparently considered important enough to monitor. The supervising agent reviewing the drone feed that morning noted it with one additional line. Subject demonstrates awareness of delivery protocol and apparent operational oversight role. That entry, 4 lines below the thermal signature confirmation from April 11th, was the moment the case shifted from welfare concern to federal kidnapping investigation. The pattern of life analysis was complete by April 19th. Omaha presented the case to an assistant United States attorney in the Northern District of Iowa. By afternoon of April 20th, a federal search warrant for the compound and a criminal complaint charging 2 senior leaders with federal kidnapping and conspiracy had been signed by a magistrate judge. What's most surprising about this case is not the scale of the operation that followed. It's how close it came to never happening. The dormant 2024 inquiry was weeks from being permanently closed and expunged. If Marlys Vandenberg's call had come in 3 weeks later, there would have been no recent flag to pull. The tip would have gone to local law enforcement, been treated as a welfare concern, and likely resulted in a phone call to the fellowship's legal representative. A phone call that would have resolved nothing. The dormant file was the difference between a federal operation and a dead end. The 2024 inquiry should never have been allowed to go dormant. The Fifth Amendment refusals from senior leadership, combined with the original allegation that a woman had been prevented from leaving, gave agents enough to warrant continued monitoring. That it was shelved reflects a tendency to treat religious community complaints as lower priority until something goes catastrophically wrong. In this case, a diner cook's observation crossed that threshold. Next time, there may be no diner cook. Before the raid could proceed, investigators worked through a detail from the cell site analysis. One of the 3 burner phones inside the outbuilding had, on 2 occasions during surveillance, attempted to connect to a cell tower outside the compound. Both attempts had failed. The signal was too weak. But the attempts were recorded in the carrier's technical log, obtained under the surveillance warrant. The attempts had been made at 1:43 a.m. on April 12th and at 2:57 a.m. on April 14th. Both lasted between 4 and 7 seconds before the phone quit trying. Both originated from the same device, the one with the weakest signal profile, the one whose battery, as investigators would later learn, was the most depleted. The technical analyst reviewing the carrier log noted something the surveillance team had not initially considered. The 2 attempted connections had coincided, within minutes, with the passage of vehicles on the county road outside the compound. Vehicles with active cell signals. The phone inside had detected the passing signals and attempted to connect through them, behavior consistent with a device whose user was actively trying to reach the outside. Someone inside that building had been trying to make a call. Twice. They had not succeeded. And they had not stopped trying. That technical finding was included in the affidavit supporting the search warrant. The magistrate who reviewed the warrant application later noted, in remarks made at a subsequent court proceeding, that the combination of thermal signatures, cell site data, food deliveries, and attempted outbound connections from a building the fellowship had described as unoccupied storage constituted one of the cleaner probable cause showings he had reviewed in 12 years on the federal bench. The raid was planned in 4 days. The FBI's hostage rescue team was tasked as the primary entry element, with support from the U.S. Marshals Service. Local law enforcement, Dubuque County Sheriff's deputies, established an outer perimeter. A federal emergency medical team was staged 2 miles from the compound entrance. The specific challenge was the outbuilding's interior configuration. The warrant search had identified the structure from outside, from drone thermal, and from power records. What it had not provided was an interior schematic. The original scout camp construction records at the county assessor's office showed the building as an open bay equipment shed. Post-purchase modifications completed without permits were unknown. 48 hours before the entry, the planning team identified another problem. The county road accessing the compound passed through a low area that had taken significant rainfall on April 17th and 18th. Satellite imagery showed the access road's unpaved sections were compromised. Vehicle access to the compound gate could not be guaranteed for heavy tactical vehicles. The team adjusted. Lighter vehicles would carry the entry elements to a staging position 300 meters from the compound's east fence. The team would approach on foot across a fallow field. The perimeter vehicles would remain on the hardened surface closer to the highway. It added 7 minutes to the approach. That adjustment very nearly mattered. At 4:47 a.m. on April 21st, the entry team breached the east wall of the outbuilding. Not the door. Intelligence from drone surveillance indicated the interior had been partitioned after purchase, with the original single-access door now leading into an anteroom. Breaching through the wall directly into the main interior reduced the risk of early alert to anyone positioned in the anteroom. The wall gave on the second hydraulic strike. Inside, a climate-controlled interior space, with a single locked door to a secondary room. 2 male occupants in the outer space, junior members of the fellowship, apparently assigned to monitor the building, were secured without resistance within 40 seconds. The locked interior door took 11 seconds to clear. 3 young women, ages 23, 25, and 26. All 3 had been reported missing the previous winter. The 23-year-old from Cedar Rapids, the 25-year-old from Waterloo, the 26-year-old from a small town in southern Minnesota near the Iowa border. Each had been missing since a different week in January 2026. Each had been held for 89 days. All 3 were conscious. All 3 were ambulatory. All 3 walked out of the room under their own power when the door came open. Medics met them at the east breach point within 4 minutes. All 3 were transported by ambulance to a hospital in Dubuque. Medical personnel noted that each woman received immediate clinical evaluation upon arrival, and extended care protocols were initiated for all 3. The youngest one asked, while still inside the outbuilding, whether her mother had been told. The answer, at that moment, was not yet. That would come within the hour. While the outbuilding team conducted the rescue, a second HRT stack breached the main lodge. 7 male occupants were inside, including the 2 senior leaders named in the criminal complaint. All 7 were taken into custody without use of force. The main lodge contained communal living quarters and a dedicated administrative space with financial records, computers, and 2 storage safes. Both safes were opened under the terms of the search warrant. The scene at the lodge was quiet. No weapons were recovered. No attempt was made by any occupant to resist or flee. The operation from first breach to full site control took 11 minutes. Investigators would later describe the planning of those 11 minutes as among the more methodical in recent regional federal operations. They would also note with precision that the planning nearly had to be abandoned entirely 20 hours before execution. At approximately 9 p.m. on April 20th, the evening before the raid, one of the cell phones associated with the outbuilding went dark. The signal simply stopped. The surveillance team's technical unit spent 40 minutes determining whether the phone had been powered down deliberately, had run out of battery, or had moved outside the cell site simulator's range. The distinction mattered. A deliberate power down could indicate that someone inside, or someone outside communicating with someone inside, had been tipped to the operation. After 40 minutes, the technical unit determined that the phone had most likely been powered down due to battery depletion. The usage pattern over the preceding 9 days was consistent with a device that had not been charged. The determination was made with a confidence level that the supervising agent later described, in court, as high but not absolute. The operation proceeded. Put yourself in that agent's shoes. Sitting in a field operations vehicle at 9 p.m., the night before a hostage rescue team deployment, watching a phone signal disappear, knowing that if the decision to proceed is wrong, you are sending a team into a compromised entry. That call, made at 9:47 p.m. on April 20th, is what determined everything that followed. The agent proceeded. The remaining 2 phones were still active inside the building when the team breached at 4:47. The third phone, as it turned out, had been turned off because one of the young women inside had been trying to conserve its remaining battery, rationing its charge against the possibility of a moment that might require it. She had not known help was 11 days into looking for her. She had not known that Marlys Vandenberg had written a license plate number on a receipt 8 days earlier. She had simply been trying to preserve a few more hours on a phone that had, so far, not been able to reach anyone. She was 25 years old. She had been reported missing from Waterloo on January 18, 2026. In the days following the rescue, federal investigators worked to reconstruct how 3 women from 3 separate cities had come to be held in the same building on the same rural Iowa compound. The picture that emerged was not fully complete as of the initial federal filing, but its outlines were clear enough to inform the charging documents. The 26-year-old from southern Minnesota had been the first to disappear on January 7, 2026. She had been reported missing by her employer after failing to appear for a scheduled shift and not answering her phone. Local law enforcement in her home county opened a missing persons case. There were no immediate leads and no witnesses. She had last been seen leaving a gas station 3 miles from her home at approximately 11 p.m., the night before her shift. The 25-year-old from Waterloo had gone missing 11 days later, on January 18th. Her mother filed the report the following morning. The Waterloo Police Department flagged the case as concerning within 48 hours because the woman, described by her family as meticulous about keeping in contact, had simply stopped responding to messages without any prior indication of distress. Her car had been found in the parking lot of a shopping center 2 miles from her apartment. There was nothing in the car that indicated a struggle. The 23-year-old from Cedar Rapids had been the last, disappearing on January 29th. She had been due to begin a nursing position at a hospital in Cedar Rapids on February 19th. Her mother reported her missing after she failed to come home from what she had described as a brief errand. 3 women, 3 cities, 3 separate weeks in January. No common social network that investigators had yet identified. No shared employer, no shared neighborhood, no digital connection visible in their recovered communications. The method of contact, how the fellowship had identified and approached each of them, remained an open question. Agents believed the contact had been made online, through one or more platforms, but the specific accounts and the communications had not yet been fully recovered from the devices seized at the compound. What the charging documents did establish, based on financial records recovered from the administrative space in the main lodge, was that each disappearance had been preceded by a specific expenditure. 3 separate transactions in the fellowship's operational accounts, each in the range of $300 to $500, each coded in the fellowship's internal ledger as travel. The dates of those transactions corresponded within a day or two to each woman's disappearance. Someone had driven to Cedar Rapids. Someone had driven to Waterloo. Someone had driven to a gas station 3 miles outside a small town in southern Minnesota. And each time, they had spent between $300 and $500 and come back with a person. 7 members of Cedar Ridge Fellowship were charged on federal kidnapping and conspiracy counts. The 2 senior leaders, identified in charging documents as the principals, faced additional counts related to false statements to federal investigators, specifically the 2024 Fifth Amendment invocations and subsequent written correspondence to the FBI's Omaha office that investigators alleged contained material misrepresentations about the compound's population. The fellowship's finances, examined by forensic accountants working for the U.S. Attorney's Office, traced to a $4.2 million land trust registered through a Sioux Falls, South Dakota entity. The Sioux Falls entity connected to a second nonprofit registration in a neighboring state, and a third set of accounts federal accountants identified as active in the 6 months prior to the fellowship's acquisition of the compound. Where the $4.2 million originated remained, at the time of the initial court filing, an open question. The Sioux Falls shell entity had been structured to obscure beneficial ownership, and the accountants estimated that full financial reconstruction would take between 4 and 6 months. The 3 young women were transported to a hospital in Dubuque within the hour of the raid. By afternoon of April 21st, all 3 had been reunited with family members who had traveled through the night. The reunions occurred at the hospital. Federal investigators were present but did not conduct substantive interviews until the following day, at the women's own request and with their counsel present. All 3 families had been notified before 6 a.m., within 74 minutes of the breach. On April 22nd, the day after the raid, investigators conducted the first of what would become a series of voluntary interviews with the 3 women. The interviews were conducted in a conference room at the hospital, with each woman's attorney present, and with a federal victim advocate present throughout. The interviews lasted between 2 and 3 hours each. Their content was largely sealed under the terms of the ongoing grand jury proceeding, but the charging documents filed in the following weeks incorporated several details that could only have originated from those conversations. One of those details was how the phones had come to be in the room. 2 of the phones had been brought by the women themselves, carried in, concealed in clothing, at the moment of their arrival at the compound in January. The fellowship's intake process had included a search of personal belongings, but the search had not been thorough enough to locate both devices. The 3rd phone had arrived later, passed to one of the women by a junior fellowship member during a delivery in late February. The women had not known whether the junior member had acted on his own or under instruction from leadership. They had not been able to determine this during their 89 days inside the building, and they were not able to clarify it in their first interviews. That question remained part of the investigation. The detail about the phone passed through the delivery was one of the elements that investigators used to build the conspiracy count against the full group of 7, rather than limiting the principal charges to the 2 senior leaders. If a junior member had passed a phone to the women being held, regardless of whether he had done so on instruction or on his own, he had participated in an act that acknowledged what was happening inside that building and had either advanced or attempted to undermine it. In either reading, he was inside the conspiracy. Marlys Vandenberg found out about the raid the same morning she finished her shift. She heard it on the radio driving home. A Cedar Rapids reporter reached her by phone that afternoon. She said what she had to say in one sentence. Nobody orders 3 teas with no sugar at 3 in the morning. She had just noticed. She went home and slept. The question worth sitting with is not whether the system worked. It did, this time. The question is the gap between this time and the 2024 inquiry that went dormant. The former member who filed that 2024 complaint described her sister being prevented from leaving. Her sister eventually did leave. The inquiry was set aside. What the investigators who set it aside did not know, could not have known, based on what was then available, was that the same two leaders who had declined interviews under the Fifth Amendment would, within 18 months, be named in a federal kidnapping complaint involving 3 women from 3 different cities. The dormant file nearly expired. It would have, if not for the tip. That's not a near miss to be filed away. It's a structural problem. The threshold for sustaining a religious community inquiry is set higher than the threshold that would catch this kind of operation before it reaches 89 days. The 7 charged individuals faced federal arraignment in the Northern District of Iowa. Bail was denied for the 2 senior leaders on the basis of flight risk and danger to the community. The 5 remaining members were held pending hearings. No trial date had been set as of the end of April 2026. Several things remained unresolved. The land trust originating funds, the $4.2 million that purchased the compound, had not been fully traced. Federal accountants were still working backward through the Sioux Falls entity. If the money connected to additional individuals or organizations outside the fellowship itself, those connections had not yet been confirmed or charged. The outbuilding's unpermitted interior modifications had been partially planned before the fellowship moved in, based on construction material records from a supplier in Dubuque that investigators subpoenaed in late April. Who designed those modifications, and when the decision to use the building for the purpose to which it was ultimately put was made, remained part of the ongoing investigation. And there was one more thing. The former member from 2024, the one whose complaint had opened and then closed the original inquiry, had been located by federal investigators after the arrest. She was interviewed voluntarily. The substance of that interview was sealed under the terms of an ongoing grand jury proceeding as of the date of the initial federal filing. Her sister, the woman who had been prevented from leaving the compound 2 years earlier and who had eventually left, was not among the 3 women rescued on April 21, 2026. She was, as of the date of the federal complaint, unaccounted for. The investigation into Cedar Ridge Fellowship was listed as active. The financial reconstruction was continuing. The grand jury was impaneled. The 3 women from Cedar Rapids, Waterloo, and southern Minnesota were home. One of them, the youngest, 23 years old, from Cedar Rapids, had been scheduled to start a nursing position at a hospital there the previous February. She had been reported missing by her mother 22 days before she was supposed to begin. Her mother was in the hospital room in Dubuque when she woke up on the morning of April 21st. The network that held 3 women for 89 days has been dismantled. The mechanisms that allowed it to operate for longer, the dormant inquiries, the unpermitted buildings, the financial structures designed to obscure, some of those remain in place, waiting for a different compound, a different county road, a different set of circumstances in which there is no diner and no cook who works the 10 to 6 shift and notices that nobody orders 3 teas with no sugar at 3 in the morning. Marlys Vandenberg went back to work the following Monday. Same shift, same diner, same county road outside the window. She is still there,